In the world of crime, some criminals leave an especially noticeable mark. This time, let's talk about a serial killer who carried out a truly bloody hunt on the territory of the United States. Elizabeth Kenyon, a 23-year-old girl, cherished a dream of a modeling career. On March 5, 1984, she successfully made it to the finals of a beauty pageant in Florida. Unfortunately, her hopes were not destined to become reality. The very next day, Elizabeth suddenly disappeared, which was completely unlike her usual behavior. Worried parents filed a missing person report with the Miami police. However, as often happens, law enforcement officers saw no grounds for concern. The police assumed that the girl, inspired by her success at the contest, simply decided to celebrate her victory somewhere with friends or with a boyfriend. Relatives were advised to wait another day before officially filing a report. Of course, the Kenyon family did not agree with this approach. They insisted that Elizabeth had never been a fan of noisy parties and always informed her loved ones about her plans. But even after a day, the officers reacted to the parents' appeal rather sluggishly. It became clear that this case was unlikely to attract proper attention from the authorities. Meanwhile, the missing girl's mother intuitively felt that something bad had happened to her daughter. In the end, the parents hired a private detective. Together with him, they went to Elizabeth's apartment in search of at least some clues. After examining the apartment, they noticed the girl's address book and photo album. There were several pictures of Elizabeth's friends, as well as a short note about a photo shoot scheduled for the day of her disappearance. The address of the studio where she was going to go was also indicated. By questioning the concierge, the detective confirmed that the missing girl was indeed seen that day in the company of some man. Soon the detective managed to find out that Elizabeth had made an appointment with 38-year-old Christopher Wilder, whom she had been dating for some time. Wilder had even proposed to her, but the girl rejected the offer, citing the too big 15-year age difference. 6 days after the disappearance, on March 11th, the detective called Christopher and asked him a few questions about Elizabeth. He confirmed that he had indeed photographed her, after which she left, and since then he had no idea about her whereabouts. The detective arranged a personal meeting with the photographer. During a casual conversation, Christopher showed him his work. However, no significant clues were found. The only thing that caught the attention of the experienced detective was one candid photo of Elizabeth, in which the girl looked scared. Wilder continued to insist that they had a short photo session that day, after which Elizabeth left with some man unknown to him. But despite this, the private detective decided to take a closer look at the photographer's personality. It turned out that Christopher Wilder was born on March 13, 1945 in Sydney, Australia, to an Australian woman and a U.S. Navy officer. He was the eldest of the couple's 4 sons. Fate immediately began to test the boy's strength. At birth, he nearly died, and at the age of 2, a miracle saved him when he was drowning in a pool. But the troubles did not end there. On January 4, 1963, 17-year-old Christopher, along with 2 friends, visited a quarry. There, in the company of his buddies, the young man raped a 13-year-old girl. Despite the fact that all 3 denied their guilt, Wilder was sentenced to probation. Later, he claimed that as part of his rehabilitation, he underwent electroshock therapy. Analyzing his subsequent actions, some experts suggested that such a traumatic experience could only worsen his condition and fuel the sadistic inclinations that manifested later. However, no evidence of the use of such methods was ever found. It is quite possible that Wilder himself made up the story about shock therapy for self-justification. One journalist also questioned the veracity of the story about the pool incident, as Christopher's parents never confirmed it. It seems he tried in this way to arouse sympathy for his own person. Christopher Wilder got married in 1968, but his marriage was short-lived. His wife left him just a week after the wedding when he was detained on suspicion of a series of sexual harassment incidents on Manly Beach in Australia. After the divorce, Chris's ex-wife went to the police. According to her, from the very first days of their married life, her former husband tried to seduce her mother and another relative. By chance, she came across photographs of girls in lingerie in Christopher's work briefcase. Similar pictures were also kept in his car. It seemed he had some kind of obsessive mania about women. In addition, his wife suspected that Wilder had twice tried to strangle her during intimate relations. In November 1969, Christopher, threatening to make public nude photos, forced a young nursing student from Australia to have. The girl complained to law enforcement, but later refused to testify in court, fearing revenge from the photographer. Already then, according to her, he behaved inadequately. Shortly after these events, Christopher Wilder emigrated to the United States. The resourceful Australian got into the real estate business and achieved remarkable success in this field, accumulating considerable wealth. He purchased a luxurious mansion on the coast in Boynton Beach near Miami, a Porsche 911 car, and his own boat. Chris became passionate about car racing and even participated in the Miami Grand Prix. In general, he led the life of a wealthy man, often vacationing in Hawaii and the Bahamas. During this period, his passion for photography reached its apogee. The man acquired expensive photo equipment to make the shots flawless. In his estate, Christopher even set up a photo lab where he could indulge in creative pursuits. However, in parallel, he was seized by a completely different desire, far from art. From 1971 to 1975, Wilder repeatedly figured in investigations of sexual crimes. Once he lured a young woman into his pickup truck, allegedly for a photo shoot for a modeling agency. Of course, this was just a lie. The girl suffered a brutal. However, despite numerous statements from victims, Christopher always managed to avoid punishment for his crimes. In 1977, he worked with a psychiatrist who concluded that the patient was mentally ill with inclinations towards sexual violence. According to the doctor, the Australian posed an obvious danger and had to be under the constant supervision of physicians, as well as undergo a specialized rehabilitation program. The expert noted that Chris showed an obsessive desire to dominate women, humiliate them to the level of slaves, cause them pain, and mutilate them. But even the specialist's conclusion had no impact on the decision of the jury, who acquitted the suspect. On April 13, 1980, Wilder tried to kidnap 17-year-old Carla Hendry in the city of Beverly, Massachusetts. Fortunately, the girl managed to escape from the criminal. Information about the kidnapper's car was made public, but to no avail. Only in 1982, when Christopher visited his parents in Australia, he was accused of a sexual crime against two 15-year-old girls in Manly. He lured them to a deserted place and forced them to pose naked. Fortunately, the girls did not suffer serious injuries and were able to identify the offender. Christopher was arrested, but his parents posted bail for him. The suspect was even allowed to return to Florida pending trial, which was scheduled for April 1984. During the investigation, detectives managed to establish that 5 days before Elizabeth's disappearance, another girl went missing, 20-year-old Rosario Gonzalez. This happened during the Miami Grand Prix. Christopher, who was an avid racing fan, had photographs of Rosario. He was personally present at the race where the girl disappeared and even took 17th place, winning a $400 prize. Rosario worked as a model for a marketing company involved in this event, handing out promotional flyers and souvenirs. The girl vanished immediately after the race ended. As it later turned out, she agreed to a photo shoot with Christopher, who then drove away in his Porsche. These coincidences seemed non-accidental and suggested that it was Chris who was involved in the disappearance of both girls. On March 12th, Elizabeth's parents sought help from a special FBI agent from the Homicide Investigation Department at the Miami office. But at that moment, the special services did not show much interest in this case. Therefore, the private detective hired by the missing girl's family provided information to the Miami newspaper. In this way, the family tried to draw the attention of the public and law enforcement to these events, and, possibly, provoke some reaction from the alleged kidnapper. On March 16, 1984, an article appeared in the press that did not mention Christopher's name, but reported that the police had certain progress in the investigation and were looking for a suspect. A brief description of him was provided. The criminal was probably an Australian, passionate about car racing and amateur photography. These details directly pointed to Wilder, so they should have caused some reaction from him. but no one expected such a stormy development of events. Thanks to the publicity in the media, the special services finally became interested in these disappearances. Analyzing the collected facts, the agents immediately noticed the suspicious coincidences in the circumstances of Elizabeth and Rosario's disappearance. Both girls had arranged a photo shoot with Christopher the day before. A check of Wilder in police databases confirmed that he had numerous problems with the law in Australia. In particular, he was on probation in a case of sexual violence and was awaiting a new trial. The collected evidence allowed the FBI to launch a full-scale investigation on March 21st. During the same period, a woman named Linda Grover turned to the police with a statement about an attempted abduction. She lived in the city of Tallahassee and reported that she was attacked by a man who tried to forcibly take her away in an unknown direction in order to keep her as a captive or a slave. Fortunately, the victim managed to escape from the criminal. Linda described the attacker. His features completely coincided with the appearance of Christopher Wilder. An FBI agent urgently went to Georgia to talk with the victim. Linda Grover turned out to be a 19-year-old girl who worked part-time distributing advertising flyers in a supermarket. Once, a stranger approached her, began to enthusiastically comment on her appearance, and suggested trying herself as a model. He introduced himself as a professional photographer and invited the girl to his car, allegedly to show his portfolio. The stranger began to praise Linda's beauty, predicting her success in the modeling business. He assured her that with his help, she could easily sign contracts with leading fashion magazines like Vogue. But Linda declined this offer and walked away. However, the man continued to follow her, driving alongside in his car. He persuaded the girl to go to the park for a couple of trial shots, promising to pay $25. Linda refused again and hid in the store. But when she came out, Christopher was already waiting for her. Despite his attractive appearance, something sinister emanated from this guy, so the girl became alarmed. She furtively looked around in search of someone who could come to her aid and frantically pondered what to do next. But there was no one around. Christopher did not let up, convincing her to agree to the shoot. He opened the car door and began to show glossy magazines. All this was happening in broad daylight in a public place. For a moment, Linda lost her vigilance, and at that instant, the criminal stunned her with a blow to the head. The girl lost consciousness. When Linda Grover came to her senses, she found herself completely immobilized. She was lying on the back seat of the car and burst into tears of despair. This infuriated her abductor. He abruptly braked, taped the girl's mouth shut, and shoved her into the trunk. Soon they found themselves in some motel. The criminal threatened to kill Linda at the slightest attempt to escape. While the captive lay immobilized in a sleeping bag, Christopher glued her eyelids shut with superglue and then tied her tightly with ropes. After that, he tortured and his victim for several hours. As soon as the girl began to resist, the kidnapper used a stun gun. Wilder's cruelty knew no bounds, so Linda had no doubt about her inevitable death. But once, when the sadist was distracted for a moment, she managed to free herself from the bonds and hide in the bathroom. There, the girl began to bang on the wall with all her might and call for help. A commotion arose, and the criminal, fearing exposure, hastily fled. When an FBI agent showed Linda a photo of Christopher, she shuddered, and without a shadow of a doubt, recognized him as her tormentor. Subsequently, Grover became a key witness in the case. However, the girl was able to recover from the shock experienced only after a few years. At the age of 35, she defended her dissertation and repeatedly shared with the media the story of her amazing salvation. In 1984, immediately after her release, Linda did not even realize how lucky she was. Despite the fear she experienced, the girl burned with determination to put the criminal behind bars for a long term as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the investigation was progressing too slowly. A week later, the witness was forced to leave the state for fear for her own life. At this stage, it became clear that the police were dealing with an extremely dangerous and cruel man who had many crimes on his record. Linda was secretly taken out of the city under the supervision of an FBI agent and hidden in a safe place, without disclosing her new address. To bring charges against Wilder for the abduction of Rosario Gonzalez and Elizabeth Kenyon, strong evidence was needed. Law enforcement officers obtained warrants to search the suspect's home and arrest him. Together with FBI agents, the police broke into Christopher's home, prying the door open. But unfortunately, the dwelling turned out to be empty. The owner had fled a few days before the visit of the special services. He was significantly ahead of his pursuers. A desperate hunt for the fugitive began. The operatives hoped to find at least some clues in Wilder's house about his possible whereabouts. Given the perverse cruelty with which Christopher had tortured Linda, the experts assumed that the other two missing girls were already dead, and Grover had become the new prey of the insatiable predator. The FBI conducted an extremely thorough search, but it seemed as if the criminal had wiped everything clean in advance. Not a single fingerprint, not a single hint. Questioning Wilder's neighbors, the investigators learned that he had disappeared immediately after his latest victim miraculously escaped from the motel. It seems the sadist realized that the police were already on his trail and could visit his home at any moment. The agents also checked the suspect's bank accounts, as he had considerable wealth in real estate. Due to the slowness of the data processing systems of that time, information about financial transactions came with a noticeable delay. Unfortunately, Chris was always one step ahead of his pursuers. On March 21st in Canaveral Groves, Florida, the body of a young woman was found. She turned out to be 21-year-old Teresa Ferguson. The girl was last seen in a shopping mall with a man whose description matched Wilder's appearance. The investigation managed to establish that before her death, the victim was long and brutally beaten with a blunt object and then strangled. The crime's modus operandi pointed to Christopher, so now the number of his probable victims had risen to 4. The FBI agents were finally convinced that they were dealing with a serial killer who, at that very moment, could be taking the life of another helpless girl. There was no time to lose. They had to act as quickly as possible. On the same day, another alarming news arrived. On the eve of the search of the suspect's house, Christopher was spotted at a local bank in Tampa, where he withdrew a large sum of cash from his account. This news did not bode well. Now the serial killer had enough money to freely move around the country, paying in cash and not attracting undue attention. Moreover, Wilder was already a whole day ahead of the police, so he could be anywhere. On March 22, 1984, the photographer-kidnapper was seen in Texas. Several witnesses confirmed that they had personally observed him talking with 23-year-old Terry Walden in the parking lot of Lamar University in the city of Beaumont. At that time, the girl was studying to be a nurse, was married, and had 2 young children. Christopher made his standard offer of a photo shoot to her, but the student politely declined the idea. Fortunately, Wilder was unable to abduct her by force then. This saved Terry's life, but unfortunately not for long. The very next day, she ran into him again at the supermarket. It seemed as if the killer was deliberately lying in wait for her, literally hunting his prey. Christopher again suggested that the girl pose in front of the camera, this time speaking more insistently. Terry refused again. This time, the perverted photographer was firmly determined not to let her go. He consistently stalked his victim through the store and then in the parking lot until he hit her on the head and dragged her into his car. Terry Walden's mutilated body was found the next day, almost immediately after her husband went to the police with a statement about his wife's disappearance. The FBI relentlessly pursued the country's most dangerous criminal, but he was always one step ahead. According to the agents' calculations, Wilder was at least 2 days ahead of them. A press release was urgently sent out from the Miami office with a description of the car that Chris most likely used during Terry's abduction. However, this information did not help much in the search, as such a vehicle was quite common throughout the country. In addition, the license plate numbers of the car remained unknown. At the same time, orientation data on Wilder and his composite sketch were distributed in every state. But unfortunately, communication technologies were not so advanced in those days. The dissemination of information occurred with delays. The FBI agents had little choice but to follow in the footsteps that the psychopath killer left everywhere in the form of mutilated female bodies. The Australian maniac did not take long to commit his next crime. a new victim fell into his snare at a shopping mall in Oklahoma. On March 25th, Wilder abducted 21-year-old Suzanne Wendy Logan. Christopher took her to the town of Newton in Kansas and checked into a motel there. The next morning, after breakfast, the kidnapper headed to a reservoir where he mercilessly stabbed the girl and left her mutilated body to fend for itself. 2 days later, Suzanne's remains were discovered by a local fisherman. Before her death, the girl suffered brutal torture, numerous and was brutally murdered. On March 28th, FBI agents had a real chance to catch Wilder. They were informed that the wanted man had rented a room at the Colorado Motel and paid with a stolen credit card. This circumstance made it possible to track the criminal's whereabouts. The agents knew that Christopher used other people's cards, but so far he had been lucky not to get caught. Due to the delay in receiving information, the officers learned about the payment for the room only the next day. All available police officers were urgently mobilized. Together with the FBI agents, they rushed to detain the dangerous fugitive. But unfortunately, when the special squad arrived, Wilder was long gone. The only thing they managed to achieve was to reduce the gap with the criminal to about 24 hours. But even that was not enough. The searchers had no idea where to head next. Next time, Christopher was spotted at a shopping mall in Grand Junction, Colorado. There he was in contact with an 18-year-old girl named Cheryl Bonaventura. They were seen together by visitors to a snack bar. They told the staff that they were heading to Las Vegas. But around March 31st, somewhere near the Kanab River in Utah, Wilder brutally shot Cheryl. Her mutilated body was found only on May 3rd. After this episode, law enforcement officers noted a clear pattern. The serial killer mostly hunted for victims in shopping malls and supermarkets. To gain the trust of the girls, Christopher appeared in public in an elegant suit, with neatly trimmed mustache and beard, and had business cards with him. A massive ring on the little finger of his left hand, a gold Rolex watch on his wrist, and a Pentax camera hanging from his shoulder completed the image of a successful and self-confident professional. Wilder gave the impression of a charming and persuasive photographer who was looking for beautiful girls for a modeling career and promised them all kinds of assistance. All this entourage lulled the vigilance of future victims. Security services and administrations of all shopping malls and supermarkets in the United States received urgent warnings, photographs, and detailed descriptions of the serial killer. But despite this, the maniac continued to travel freely around the country in search of new victims. The next was 17-year-old Michelle Korfman, abducted from a shopping mall in Las Vegas. Wilder came there for an event dedicated to photographic art and immediately set his sights on young Michelle. He offered her the first experience of a professional model photo shoot. The FBI learned about this incident on April 1st and immediately rushed to the shopping center. All photographic materials were seized from the event participants. In the pictures, they managed to recognize Michelle next to Christopher. Several frames captured how he chose a victim and secretly followed the girl. When Michelle Korfman's body was found on May 11th, among all the previous victims, it turned out to be one of the most mutilated. The tortured the defenseless girl for a long time, tying her up. He glued Michelle's mouth and eyelids with superglue, her multiple times, and even inflicted numerous knife wounds on her. Deep cuts reached 3 centimeters in length, which was not enough to kill the victim immediately, but caused excruciating pain. After this brutal crime, Christopher Wilder was included in the list of the 10 most wanted criminals in the United States. The nationwide hunt for the monster continued. 16-year-old Tina Resico from California came to a local mall in search of a summer job. The girl dreamed of saving up enough money during this time to buy a new car by the beginning of the new school year to replace the old one given to her by her father. Christopher noticed her at the mall. He complimented Tina's appearance and offered her to earn $100 by posing for a photo shoot. The schoolgirl agreed. After that, they went together to the nearest park, where Tina willingly posed in front of the camera, hoping to receive her first fee. But suddenly, Wilder took out a .357 Magnum pistol and ordered the girl to get into the car. The young hostage had no choice but to obey the armed maniac. The criminal took Tina to a motel in San Diego. It was there that the unfortunate girl found herself in real hell. The sadist again began to torture his victim. He cut her with a knife, shocked her, brutally raped her, and so for hours in an endless alternation of bullying. When it became known about the disappearance of Tina Resico, the FBI press service prepared a special bulletin. A press conference was held dedicated to this. Thus, Christopher Wilder found himself at the top of the list of the country's most wanted criminals. By that time, he had already taken the lives of at least 6 young women. Tina became the 7th victim. The topic of this serial killer did not leave the TV screens, newspaper pages, and radio airwaves. FBI agents hoped that the nationwide publicity would help speed up the capture of the monster. One of the largest search operations in U.S. history began. Tina Resico's body had not yet been found. There was a tiny hope that the 16-year-old girl might still be alive, but in reality, she had to go through new circles of hell. On the 6th day of captivity, Christopher promised Tina that he would release her if she helped lure his next prey into a trap. The captive, exhausted by torture, was ready for anything for the sake of salvation. Meanwhile, Wilder had already targeted his next victim. He forced Tina to pretend that she was looking for a job so that the new target, 16-year-old Dawnette Wilt, would agree to get into his car. The unsuspecting schoolgirl was walking around supermarkets, handing out advertising flyers as a part-time job. The plan using the bait worked. Several witnesses saw an unknown man drive away from one of the Indianapolis malls with 2 girls at once. The kidnapper's features completely coincided with the description of Christopher Wilder, whose face was already known to the whole country at that moment. But contrary to his promise, the sadist did not let Tina go, but instead forced her to watch as he tortured Dawnette. This nightmare lasted for 2 days. The girls were still alive. On April 12, 1984, the captive and her tormentor saw a news report in which Tina's mother tearfully begged the kidnapper not to kill her daughter. At that moment, the criminal panicked. Such attacks were happening to him more and more often. Wilder hastily took both hostages out of the motel. And then in the forest, he tried to finish off Dawnette. The girl, exhausted by days of torture, despaired and begged to be shot. Instead, the sadist twice plunged a knife into her body. From blood loss, combined with the sleeping pills that the kidnapper constantly pumped into the captives, Dawnette lost consciousness. Deciding that the girl was dead, Wilder left her and drove away. By some miracle, the wounded girl managed to survive this hell and regain consciousness. Dawnette even managed to gather her last strength and get to the nearest road, where she was picked up by a random motorist who provided assistance. Later, Christopher returned to the place to make sure his victim was dead, but Dawnette was no longer there, and this further fueled the maniac killer's panicky fear. Thanks to the testimony of Dawnette Wilt, who was lucky enough to survive, the FBI agents learned that the suspect was heading for the Canadian border. It soon became clear that the fugitive was moving in a car stolen from Terry Walden. This car was soon found abandoned, but the criminal managed to slip out of the hands of justice again. Next time, Wilder was spotted at a shopping mall in the city of Victor, New York. There he managed to lure another victim into a trap, 33-year-old Beth Dodge. The maniac intended to take possession of her golden Pontiac Firebird. In this scheme, the serial killer again used Tina as bait. The young hostage was with her tormentor the whole time. He took Beth to the forest using Tina's help, and then took the woman's life with 2 shots. Unlike other victims, Dodge did not suffer torture or the killer was only interested in her vehicle. After this cold-blooded murder, Christopher unexpectedly released Tina, even giving her some cash so that the exhausted captive could get home. Subsequently, Tina became a key witness and provided the investigation with a detailed description of the horrors she had to endure in the sadist's captivity. FBI agents found out that Wilder had friends in Canada whom he periodically visited even before the start of his crimes. The special services were intuitively convinced that the psychopath was heading straight for them. Having taken possession of a new car, the criminal significantly increased his lead over his pursuers. Everything indicated that Christopher was already on his way to the Canadian border. It was decided to use all available police forces, strengthen border control, and urgently inform the Canadian Special Services about the dangerous fugitive. On April 13th, the suspect was spotted at a service station in Colebrook, Connecticut. Christopher lingered there, asking the staff about the quickest way to Canada. At that moment, he was recognized by two patrol police officers. They were well aware of the wanted circulars for the dangerous criminal. The cops carefully approached to take a look at the fugitive, but Wilder noticed this and rushed to his car for a weapon. One of the officers managed to grab the serial killer from behind. A fight ensued, during which 2 shots rang out. The first bullet hit Christopher, passed through, and wounded the policeman. The second hit Wilder in the chest and proved fatal. Thus, he inadvertently shot himself. The wounded law enforcement officer survived, although he received a severe injury. He had a long recovery period ahead of him, but eventually the brave cop returned to duty. He became a real hero, neutralizing a dangerous maniac who could have taken the lives of many more women. During a search of Wilder's car, law enforcement officers found a copy of John Fowles's book, The Collector. The plot of this work revolves around a man who kidnaps a woman and keeps her against her will in a basement until the captive's death. It is assumed that the image of the novel's protagonist became a kind of ideal for Christopher, which he aspired to in real life. The serial killer's body was cremated in Florida. After his death, property worth over $7 million remained. In June 1986, the court ruled that part of these funds would be used to pay taxes. The rest of the money was distributed among the families of the victims of this monster, whose name went down in history as one of the most wanted serial killers in the United States. Journalists dubbed Christopher Wilder the Beauty Killer and the Photographer Killer. The bodies of 2 of his victims, Rosario Gonzalez and Elizabeth Kenyon, were never found. It is known for certain about Wilder's abduction of 12 women, 9 of whom he took their lives. Law enforcement officers also suspect his involvement in a number of other similar crimes against women committed during that period in the United States and Australia. Near one of the real estate objects owned by Christopher Wilder on May 29, 1982, skeletal remains of 17-year-old Tina B. were found in a bag. The victim's sister told the investigators that shortly before her disappearance, Tina was going to a photo shoot to which she was invited by some photographer. 20-year-old Sherry Linball, who was taking her first steps in the modeling business, disappeared without a trace on June 27, 1983, from the city of Boca Raton, Florida. The girl was last seen when she was going to a photo shoot. Sherry's badly decomposed body was accidentally discovered by hunters 3 months later in a forest near Shelby, New York. Another 18-year-old novice model, Tammy Lynn Leppert, went missing in Florida. Shortly before her disappearance, the girl was seen during a heated argument with a man who looked like Wilder. Tammy's mother helped her daughter develop a modeling career. According to her, the girl met Christopher at a casting for some film. Wilder allegedly tried to persuade Tammy to pose in front of the camera, but was refused. 15-year-old Colleen Emily Osborne disappeared after leaving her home in Daytona Beach, Florida, on March 15, 1984. That morning, the girl was late for the school bus, so she decided to skip classes and go to the beach. The young rebel never returned home. Colleen's body was found on April 6, 1984, half buried on the shore of a lake in Orange County, Florida. It later became known that Wilder had stayed at a motel near the crime scene on the same day. Osborne's disappearance closely resembled the modus operandi of the serial killer, who often hunted for victims on the eve of his own birthday. One of Colleen's classmates recalled that at their school, a man similar to Christopher was looking for girls for a modeling career. He even offered the young Osborne $100 to pose for him, but the schoolgirl declined the offer. In total, there are grounds to suspect that Wilder is responsible for at least 10 murders of young women. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.